The old, decrepit hotel stood alone at the end of a winding, overgrown road, shrouded in a thick mist that seemed to cling to its crumbling walls. Its once grand facade was now a grim testament to years of neglect, with ivy snaking its way through cracked windows and broken shutters hanging on rusted hinges. A flickering sign, barely readable, proclaimed its name: the Phantom Hotel. David and Emma Simmons, a young couple seeking a weekend escape from the city, pulled up to the entrance. The car's headlights illuminated the skeletal trees surrounding the property, casting long, spindly shadows that danced eerily in the fog. They exchanged a nervous glance but dismissed their unease as mere superstition. "This place has character," Emma said with forced cheerfulness, stepping out of the car and clutching her coat tighter against the chill. "Yeah, it's definitely unique," David replied, trying to match her tone, though his eyes betrayed his wariness. As they approached the entrance, the heavy oak doors creaked open, revealing a dimly lit lobby adorned with antique furniture and faded, once luxurious tapestries. A man with a gaunt, pale face stood behind the reception desk, his hollow eyes following their every move. "Welcome to the Phantom Hotel," he greeted them with a voice that was little more than a whisper. "I am Mr. Hargrove, the caretaker. Your room is ready." David and Emma exchanged another glance but stepped forward. The dim light revealed more of the lobby's oddities: a grandfather clock that seemed perpetually stuck at midnight, portraits with eyes that seemed to follow them, and a faint but unmistakable smell of decay. Mr. Hargrove handed them an old-fashioned key. "Room 213, he said, his lips curling into a faint, unsettling smile. "I trust you'll find it comfortable." They took the key, noting its cold, metallic weight, and followed the flickering lights down a narrow, twisting corridor. The wallpaper, once ornate, was now peeling and stained. The silence was oppressive, broken only by their footsteps echoing on the wooden floorboards. Room 213 was at the very end of the hall. As they turned the key and pushed the door open, a gust of cold air greeted them, carrying with it the faint sound of distant whispers. The room itself was surprisingly well kept, with a large four-poster bed and a view of the dark, sprawling forest outside. "Well, it's better than I expected," David said, trying to sound upbeat. Emma nodded, though she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. "Let's just get some rest. It'll look better in the morning." As they settled in, the hotel seemed to sigh and settle around them, its ancient timbers creaking in the night. Unbeknownst to them, the first steps of a sinister plan had already been set in motion. The Phantom Hotel had welcomed many guests before them, but none had ever truly left. In the darkness, a shadow moved just beyond the edge of perception, and a soft, malevolent laugh echoed through the empty halls. The trap had been sprung, and there would be no escape. Morning brought no relief to the oppressive gloom that hung over the Phantom Hotel. David and Emma awoke to the sound of muffled voices echoing from the hallway, but when David opened the door, he found the corridor empty. The unsettling atmosphere had seeped into their dreams, leaving them both restless and on edge. The couple decided to explore the hotel, hoping daylight would dispel the eerie feeling that had settled over them. The lobby, now bathed in a pale gray light, seemed even more desolate. Mr. Hargrove was nowhere to be seen, and the only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock, still frozen at midnight. They wandered into the dining room, where a few other guests were scattered at tables, eating breakfast in silence. An elderly woman with stark white hair and a vacant expression stared blankly out the window, while a middle-aged man in a rumpled suit nervously sipped his coffee, eyes darting around the room. "Good morning," David said, trying to break the tension. The man in the suit glanced at him, nodding curtly before returning his gaze to the table. Emma nudged David, whispering, "Let's just eat, and then go for a walk outside. Maybe some fresh air will help." As they settled at a table, a waitress appeared, her face pale and expressionless, much like Mr. Hargrove's. She moved with an eerie grace, placing their food in front of them without a word. "Thank you," Emma said, but the waitress merely nodded and disappeared back into the kitchen. They ate quickly, the silence around them amplifying every clink of their cutlery. When they finished, they ventured outside, hoping to shake off the hotel's stifling atmosphere. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing the overgrown gardens and a path leading into the dense forest. As they walked, they encountered another guest, a young woman named Lily who had checked in the previous night. Her eyes were wide with fear, and she clutched a small notebook tightly to her chest. "Hi, I'm Emma. And this is David," Emma said, offering a warm smile despite the circumstances. "Are you all right?" Lily looked around nervously before responding. "I don't think any of us should be here. This place, it's wrong. Last night, I heard someone whispering in my room, but when I turned on the light, there was no one there." David frowned. "Weird things have been happening to us too. Maybe it's just the age of the place playing tricks on us." Lily shook her head. "It's more than that. I found this in the drawer of my nightstand." She opened her notebook, revealing pages filled with frantic, scribbled warnings. "Don't stay. Leave while you can. The hotel won't let you go." Emma shivered. "Do you know who wrote this?" Lily's voice dropped to a whisper. "I think it was the previous guests. I don't think they ever left." As they returned to the hotel, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that seemed to reach out and grab at them. The air grew colder, and the oppressive silence returned, heavier than before. Inside, they gathered in the lobby, where a few more guests had convened, drawn together by a shared sense of dread. Mr. Hargrove appeared, his hollow eyes sweeping over them with a gaze that seemed to penetrate their very souls. "Dinner will be served shortly," he announced, his voice devoid of warmth. "I trust you will all join us." The guests exchanged uneasy glances but nodded. As Mr. Hargrove turned to leave, David called out, "Excuse me, Mr. Hargrove. Have there been any strange incidents here recently?" Mr. Hargrove paused, his back to them. "The hotel has a long history, Mr. Simmons. It is not unusual for old places to have their quirks." With that, he vanished down the corridor, leaving behind a palpable tension. As the guests made their way to the dining room, they couldn't shake the feeling that the hotel was watching them, its ancient walls closing in. The sense of being trapped grew stronger, and they realized they were not merely visitors. They were prisoners in a malevolent game, and the hotel itself was the puppet master. The oppressive atmosphere thickened as night fell. The guests gathered for dinner in the grand dining room, the chandeliers casting flickering shadows on the walls. Conversation was stilted, punctuated by nervous glances and forced laughter. David and Emma sat with Lily, who kept glancing at the entrance as if expecting someone, or something, to appear. The air was heavy with an unspoken dread, and the meal, despite its gourmet appearance, felt like a prelude to something sinister. Halfway through dinner, the lights flickered. A collective gasp filled the room, followed by uneasy laughter as the lights stabilized. But the momentary darkness had left everyone on edge. As dessert was being served, a shrill scream pierced the air. The guests jumped to their feet, eyes wide with terror. The scream came from the direction of the guest rooms. David and Emma rushed towards the sound, followed by a few brave souls, including Lily. They arrived at the door of room 208, where the scream had originated. The door was ajar, and the room inside was in disarray. Furniture was overturned, and the bedsheets were torn as if someone had struggled violently. "Where's Mr. Thompson?" a woman named Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "He was in here. I saw him come in after dinner." David stepped into the room, cautiously looking around. "Mr. Thompson?" he called out, but there was no response. The air was thick with the scent of something metallic. Blood. Emma pointed to the wall near the bed. "Look." Scratched into the plaster were frantic words. "Help me. The walls have eyes." Lily's face went pale. "Just like the notes I found," she whispered. "We need to get out of here." The group hurried back to the lobby, where they found Mr. Hargrove standing, his expression as unreadable as ever. "Is something the matter?" he asked, his voice a calm contrast to the guests' panic. "Mr. Thompson is missing," David shouted. "His room was a mess, and there was a message on the wall." Mr. Hargrove's eyes flickered with something like amusement. "The hotel is old. Sometimes the guests wander." "That's not wandering," Emma cried. "He was taken." Mr. Hargrove's face turned grave. "I assure you, everything is under control. Please return to your rooms. I will handle this." The guests protested, but Mr. Hargrove's demeanor brooked no argument. Reluctantly, they returned to their rooms, fear and uncertainty gnawing at them. Later that night, as David and Emma lay in bed, they heard soft whispers growing louder and more insistent. David sat up, straining to hear. The words were indistinct but filled with urgency. "Did you hear that?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David nodded. "It's coming from the walls." They pressed their ears against the cold plaster, trying to make out the words. The whisper seemed to be coming from all around them, a cacophony of voices pleading, warning, crying out for help. Suddenly, the door to their room slammed shut, and the temperature dropped sharply. They spun around to see a shadowy figure standing in the corner, its form barely discernible in the dim light. "Get out!" the figure hissed. "Before it's too late." In a blink, the figure was gone, leaving David and Emma shivering in the cold, dark room. They knew then that the hotel was more than just a building. It was alive, feeding on their fear, and it wouldn't stop until it had consumed them all. They weren't just guests in the Phantom Hotel. They were prey. And the hunt had only just begun. The following morning, the remaining guests gathered in the lobby, their faces drawn with exhaustion and fear. Whispers of Mr. Thompson's disappearance buzzed like static, growing louder with each passing minute. Emma clutched David's hand tightly as they listened to the hushed conversations. "We can't just stay here and wait for the next person to vanish," David said, addressing the group. "We need to find out what's really going on." Lily nodded, holding up her notebook filled with frantic warnings. "There must be something in this hotel, something hidden that can explain all of this." Sarah, the woman who had seen Mr. Thompson before his disappearance, stepped forward. "There's a library on the ground floor. Maybe we can find some records or clues there." The group decided to search the library, hoping to uncover the hotel's secrets. They moved cautiously through the dimly lit corridors, feeling the walls close in around them. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding, as if the hotel itself was watching their every move. The library was a large, dusty room filled with ancient books and faded paintings. The guests fanned out, searching the shelves for anything that might shed light on the hotel's dark history. David and Emma focused on a section marked Archives. They pulled out old ledgers and guest books, flipping through the pages. As they did, they noticed a disturbing pattern. Names crossed out with no indication of departure dates. "Look at this," David said, pointing to a page. "These names, there's no record of them leaving." Emma frowned. "It's like they just disappeared." Lily, meanwhile, had found an old journal tucked away behind a row of books. She opened it to find entries dating back decades, written by various caretakers of the hotel. The entries grew more frantic over time, detailing strange occurrences and inexplicable events. "Listen to this," Lily said, reading aloud. "June 12th, 1923. Another guest has vanished. The whispers are growing louder. The spirits are restless. The hotel demands more." The words sent chills down their spines. The journal continued with entries detailing disappearances, ghostly apparitions, and mysterious deaths, each caretaker passing on the horrifying legacy to the next. As they pieced together the fragments of the hotel's history, a clearer picture began to emerge. The hotel had been built on land with a dark past, a site of ancient rituals and bloodshed. The spirits of those wronged had never left, and over the years, they had claimed the hotel as their own, luring unsuspecting guests to their doom. The group reconvened, their faces pale as they shared their findings. "The hotel is a trap," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "It's been feeding on guests for decades." David nodded. "We need to get out of here. Now." But just as they made their decision, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the library into darkness. Panic set in as the room filled with the now familiar sound of whispers, louder and more insistent than ever. "Stay together," David urged, reaching for Emma's hand. A cold breeze swept through the room, extinguishing the candles they had lit. In the dim light from the windows, they saw shadowy figures moving towards them, their eyes glowing with malevolent intent. "The hotel won't let us go," Lily whispered, clutching the journal to her chest. "It's too late." As the figures closed in, the guests realized the full extent of their peril. They were trapped in a place where the boundary between the living and the dead had long since dissolved, and the spirits that haunted the Phantom Hotel were determined to claim their souls. In a desperate bid for survival, they fought against the encroaching darkness, each step taking them deeper into the hotel's malevolent embrace. The sinister revelations they had uncovered were only the beginning. The true horror was yet to come. That night, the remaining guests retreated to their rooms, hearts pounding with dread. The revelations in the library had sown seeds of panic, and every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind, seemed to herald a new terror. David and Emma tried to reassure each other, but their words felt hollow in the oppressive silence of room 213. Sleep did not come easily. When it did, it brought nightmares that were all too real. David found himself standing in a dark, endless corridor. The walls were lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow his every move. He could hear whispers, low and menacing, growing louder with each step. He tried to run, but his feet felt like they were stuck in molasses, dragging him down. Suddenly, a hand shot out from one of the portraits, grasping his arm with an iron grip. David screamed, struggling to break free, but more hands emerged, pulling him into the wall. He woke with a jolt, drenched in sweat, Emma's scream echoing in his ears. Emma was thrashing in her sleep, her face contorted in terror. "No, stay away!" she cried out, her hands clawing at the air. "Emma, wake up!" David shook her, his voice urgent. She gasped, eyes flying open, her breath coming in ragged sobs. "They were here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They were trying to take me." Across the hall, Lily and Sarah were experiencing their own nightmarish visions. Lily dreamed of being chased through the forest by shadowy figures, their breath hot on her neck, their laughter cold and mocking. Sarah saw herself trapped in a room with no doors, the walls closing in as the whispers grew deafening. In the dead of night, the hotel seemed to come alive with malevolent intent. Doors slammed shut, windows rattled, and the whispers turned into agonized wails. The guests were prisoners in a living nightmare, each trapped in their own personal hell. David and Emma decided they couldn't stay in their room any longer. They grabbed their belongings and ventured into the hallway, hoping to find the others and make a plan. The corridor was shrouded in darkness, the only light coming from the flickering sconces on the walls. They found Lily and Sarah in the lobby, their faces pale and drawn. "We have to get out of here," David said, his voice urgent. "The hotel is attacking us in our dreams." "But how?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide with fear. "The doors are locked, and the windows won't budge." Lily held up the journal she had found. "There must be something in here that can help us. We need to find the heart of this place, where the spirits are strongest. Maybe we can break the hold they have on the hotel." They agreed to search the hotel for clues, hoping to find some way to escape the nightmare. As they explored, they encountered more signs of the hotel's sinister nature. Rooms that seemed to shift and change, corridors that led to nowhere, and spectral figures that watched them from the shadows. In one of the rooms, they found a hidden staircase leading down to a basement. The air grew colder as they descended, the whispers turning into an almost physical presence, pushing against them, trying to force them back. The basement was a labyrinth of dark corridors and abandoned rooms. At the center, they found a large, ancient-looking door covered in strange symbols. Lily recognized the symbols from the journal. This was the place where the rituals had been performed, the source of the hotel's malevolent power. "We have to destroy whatever is behind this door," Lily said, her voice steady despite her fear. "It's the only way to break the curse." With trembling hands, they pushed open the door. Inside, they found an altar covered in dust and cobwebs, surrounded by old, tattered books and candles that seemed to flicker with a life of their own. At the center of the altar lay a large, ornate mirror, its surface swirling with dark energy. "The mirror," Emma whispered. "That's the source." As they approached the mirror, the room seemed to come alive with whispers and shadows. The mirror's surface reflected their fears, showing them visions of their worst nightmares. But they steeled themselves, knowing this was their only chance. David picked up one of the candles and hurled it at the mirror. The glass shattered, and a deafening scream filled the room. The shadows recoiled, and the whispers turned into wails of agony. The ground shook, and the walls began to crumble. "We need to get out of here," Lily shouted. They ran back up the stairs, the hotel collapsing around them. As they reached the lobby, they saw Mr. Hargrove, his face twisted in rage and fear. "You have no idea what you've done," he screamed. But the guests didn't stop. They burst through the front doors, which now swung open easily, and fled into the night. The hotel groaned and shuddered behind them, the spirit's hold finally broken. As they looked back, they saw the Phantom Hotel collapsing in on itself, consumed by the very darkness it had harbored for so long. The night was still and quiet, the oppressive atmosphere lifted. They had survived the night terrors, but the memory of the Phantom Hotel would haunt them forever. The collapse of the Phantom Hotel left David, Emma, Lily, and Sarah breathless, but relieved. They stood outside, watching as the once imposing structure crumbled into a heap of rubble and dust. The oppressive weight of the hotel's malevolent energy seemed to lift, replaced by the cool, crisp air of the early morning. But their ordeal was not yet over. In the ensuing chaos, They realized they had left most of their belongings inside, including Lily's journal. As the sun began to rise, casting a pale light over the destruction, a sense of dread crept back into their hearts. "We have to go back," Lily said, her voice shaky but determined. "There might be something left that can explain all of this." David hesitated. "Are you sure? What if the spirits are still there?" Lily shook her head. "We destroyed the mirror, but there might be clues in the ruins. We need to understand what happened here." Reluctantly, the group agreed. They cautiously approached the ruins, the debris still smoldering. The air was thick with the smell of burnt wood and something else, something older and more sinister. As they picked their way through the wreckage, they found remnants of the hotel's former grandeur, fragments of ornate furniture, torn tapestries, and shattered chandeliers. It was a haunting reminder of what had once been. Near what remained of the central lobby, they found a staircase leading down into the basement. Though the structure above had collapsed, the underground levels seemed largely intact. With flashlights in hand, they descended once more into the darkness. The basement was eerily quiet, the air heavy with the scent of mildew and decay. They moved carefully, aware that the spirits might still linger. At the end of a narrow corridor, they found the door to room 213, the room that had become their prison of nightmares. The door creaked open, revealing the room in disarray. The bed was overturned, the walls scorched, and the floor covered in debris. But the oppressive atmosphere that had once filled the room was gone, replaced by a cold, empty silence. Emma shivered. "This place still gives me the creeps." David nodded. "Let's make this quick." They searched the room, looking for anything that might help them understand the hotel's dark history. In a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards, they found an old leather-bound book covered in dust and cobwebs. Lily carefully opened the book, revealing pages filled with handwritten notes and drawings. "This must be the original caretaker's journal," she said, her voice filled with awe and fear. "Maybe it will tell us what really happened here." As they pored over the journal, they discovered the true extent of the hotel's malevolence. The original owner, a man named Elias Blackwood, had built the hotel on cursed land, knowing full well the spirits that haunted it. He had performed dark rituals to bind the spirits to the hotel, using the energy to draw in guests and feed on their fear. The journal detailed how each subsequent caretaker had continued the rituals, trapped in a cycle of darkness and death. The spirits had grown stronger over time, their hunger insatiable. Lily's voice trembled as she read the final entry aloud. "The spirits demand more. They will never be satisfied. I fear my time is coming to an end. May God have mercy on my soul." A chill ran through the group. The journal confirmed their worst fears. The hotel's evil was ancient and deep-rooted, a darkness that had consumed countless lives over the years. "We need to get this out of here," David said, his voice firm. "People need to know the truth." As they prepared to leave, the air grew colder, and a familiar whisper filled the room. The shadows seemed to coalesce, forming into the shape of Mr. Hargrove. His eyes glowed with a sinister light, and his face twisted into a sneer. "You think you can escape?" he hissed. "The spirits will never let you go. You belong to the hotel now." The group backed away, fear gripping their hearts. But this time, they were not powerless. David held up the caretaker's journal, the pages glowing with a faint, ethereal light. "We're not afraid of you," he said, his voice steady. "We know your secrets, and we will tell the world." Mr. Hargrove's form wavered, his sneer turning into a look of rage. With a final, ear-piercing scream, he vanished, leaving behind only the cold, empty air. The group hurried out of the basement, clutching the journal tightly. As they emerged into the morning light, they felt a sense of relief and triumph. The hotel's power had been broken, and they had the means to ensure its dark history was never forgotten. As they drove away from the ruins of the Phantom Hotel, they knew their lives would never be the same. But they also knew they had survived something truly horrifying, and that knowledge gave them the strength to face whatever came next. The haunting of room 213 was over, but the echoes of its darkness would linger in their minds forever. In the days following their escape from the Phantom Hotel, the group returned to their respective homes, each trying to process the ordeal they had survived. But the nightmare was far from over. The darkness that had permeated the hotel seemed to follow them, manifesting in small, sinister ways that slowly eroded their sense of safety and sanity. David and Emma tried to resume their normal lives, but the experience had changed them. David noticed Emma waking up in the middle of the night, eyes wide with terror, whispering about the whispers in the walls. He himself found it difficult to concentrate, haunted by fleeting shadows and the faint echo of screams in his ears. One evening, as they were preparing dinner, the phone rang. Emma answered, her face turning pale as she listened. "It's Lily," she said, handing the phone to David. "She sounds terrified." David took the phone, his heart pounding. "Lily, what's wrong?" "They're still here, David." Lily's voice trembled. "The spirits. I can hear them. They won't leave me alone." David's grip tightened on the phone. "Where are you? We'll come to you." "I'm at home," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please hurry." They arrived at Lily's apartment to find her huddled in a corner, clutching the caretaker's journal to her chest. Her eyes were wild with fear, darting around the room as if expecting something to appear out of the shadows. "They're here," she whispered. "I can feel them. They want the journal." David and Emma exchanged worried glances. "We need to destroy it," David said. "It's the only way to break their hold." Lily shook her head. "No, we need to understand it. There might be something in here that can help us get rid of them for good." Reluctantly, David agreed. They spent the night poring over the journal, searching for clues. As they read, they uncovered more about the rituals performed at the hotel and the dark power that had been harnessed there. The journal described a ritual that could potentially banish the spirits, but it was dangerous and required absolute precision. "We have to try," Emma said, her voice resolute. "It's the only way to end this." Meanwhile, Sarah, who had returned to her home, was also experiencing the lingering effects of the hotel's malevolence. She found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, feeling an invisible presence watching her every move. She barely slept, tormented by nightmares of being trapped in the hotel's shifting corridors. One night, as she lay in bed, she heard a familiar whisper. "Sarah, come back. We need you." She bolted upright, her heart racing. The voice was unmistakable. It was Mr. Hargrove. She tried to convince herself it was just her imagination, but the whisper continued, growing more insistent. In a state of growing paranoia, Sarah reached out to David and Emma. "I can't take this anymore," she said, her voice shaking. "They're still with us. We need to finish what we started." The group reunited at David and Emma's house, determined to perform the banishment ritual. They gathered the necessary items, candles, salt, and the caretaker's journal. As they prepared, the atmosphere grew tense, each of them feeling the weight of the spirit's presence. They began the ritual, chanting the incantations from the journal. The air grew cold and the room darkened, shadows swirling around them. The candles flickered, and a low, guttural moan filled the air. David's voice shook as he recited the final lines of the ritual. "Spirits bound by darkness, we command you to depart. Return to the void from whence you came." The shadows coalesced into a dark, writhing mass in the center of the room. The moan turned into a scream, piercing and otherworldly. The group held their ground, continuing the chant despite their terror. With a final deafening scream, the shadows burst apart, and the room was flooded with light. The air grew warm again, and the oppressive weight lifted. The ritual had worked. The spirits were gone. Exhausted but relieved, the group collapsed onto the floor. They had faced their fears and triumphed, but the experience had left its mark. They knew they would never forget the horrors they had faced, but they also knew they had broken the hotel's malevolent hold once and for all. The growing paranoia that had haunted them began to fade, replaced by a cautious sense of peace. They had survived the Phantom Hotel, and in doing so, had reclaimed their lives from the darkness that had sought to consume them. The successful banishment ritual brought temporary relief to David, Emma, Lily, and Sarah, but they couldn't shake the feeling that something remained unresolved. The air was lighter, the whispers had ceased, but a sense of unease lingered. They had destroyed the spirits, but the malevolent essence of the Phantom Hotel seemed to hover at the edge of their awareness, like a shadow waiting to reappear. The following day, the group gathered at David and Emma's house to discuss their next steps. Lily brought the caretaker's journal, now a critical piece of evidence in understanding the full extent of the hotel's dark history. "There's one entry that we haven't fully deciphered," Lily said, pointing to a page near the end of the journal. "It mentions a final safeguard, a trap set by the spirits to reclaim their power if they were ever banished." David frowned, leaning over the journal. "A trap? What kind of trap?" Emma's eyes widened as she read the entry. "It says here that the spirits bound their essence to an object, a talisman hidden within the ruins of the hotel. If the talisman is not destroyed, the spirits can return." Sarah's voice trembled. "So, we have to go back to the ruins?" Lily nodded. "We have no choice. If we don't destroy the talisman, everything we did will be for nothing. The spirits will return, and they'll be even stronger." The decision was unanimous. They had to return to the ruins of the Phantom Hotel and find the talisman. Armed with the caretaker's journal, flashlights, and a renewed determination, they set out for the hotel once more. The drive was tense, the air thick with anticipation and fear. When they arrived, the ruins looked even more desolate in the harsh light of day. The once grand structure was now a pile of rubble, but there was a sense of dormant malevolence that hung in the air. They picked their way through the debris, careful to avoid unstable sections. The caretaker's journal had mentioned a hidden chamber beneath the basement, accessible through a concealed passageway. It was there that they would find the talisman. The basement, though partially collapsed, still held the entrance to the hidden chamber. The group moved aside debris and found a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. Their flashlights barely penetrated the gloom as they descended, the air growing colder with each step. At the bottom, they found a heavy iron door, rusted but still intact. Inscribed on its surface were the same strange symbols they had seen in the journal. With a deep breath, David pushed the door open, revealing a small chamber lit by an eerie, unnatural glow. In the center of the chamber stood an altar, and upon it lay the talisman, a dark, twisted object that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The air around it was thick with the remnants of the spirit's malevolence. Emma stepped forward, her voice steady. "We need to destroy it, once and for all." Lily nodded, holding up the journal. The ritual. We have to perform it here. It's the only way to ensure the spirits can't return. They formed a circle around the altar, holding hands to steady each other. Lily began to chant the incantation, her voice growing stronger with each word. The air grew colder, and the chamber filled with a low, menacing hum. As the ritual reached its climax, the talisman began to tremble, dark energy swirling around it. The hum turned into a deafening roar, and the walls of the chamber shook. But the group held firm, their voices united in the final incantation. With a blinding flash of light, the talisman shattered, its pieces dissolving into nothingness. The roar ceased, replaced by a profound silence. The malevolent energy dissipated, leaving the chamber feeling empty but peaceful. They had done it. The trap was sprung, but they had triumphed. Breathing a collective sigh of relief, they made their way back up the narrow staircase and out of the ruins. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light over the desolate landscape. For the first time since their ordeal began, they felt a true sense of peace. As they drove away, leaving the ruins of the Phantom Hotel behind, they knew they had broken the cycle of darkness. The spirits were gone, their power destroyed. The hotel would no longer claim any more victims. They had faced their fears and emerged victorious. The trap had been set, but they had not only avoided it, they had dismantled it, ensuring the malevolence of the Phantom Hotel would remain buried in the past, where it belonged. Relief washed over the group as they left the ruins behind, but the feeling was short-lived. As they drove back to David and Emma's house, an unsettling realization dawned on them. The talisman was destroyed, but their connection to the spirits felt stronger than ever. It was as if the final battle was still to come. That night, as they gathered in the living room, the air grew heavy with an unnatural chill. The caretaker's journal lay open on the coffee table, its pages fluttering despite the absence of wind. Emma noticed it first. "Look at the journal," she whispered, pointing to the pages that seemed to turn on their own. Lily leaned closer, her eyes widening as she read the newly revealed entry. It says here that the spirit's last act is to reclaim their power by possessing those who tried to banish them. They won't rest until they've taken us. David's jaw clenched. "We need to finish this. If they're coming for us, we need to be ready." The group set to work, preparing their final stand. They barricaded the windows and doors, drawing protective symbols from the journal on the walls and floors. They gathered candles, salt, and other items they would need to create a sacred space to fend off the spirits. As midnight approached, the atmosphere grew oppressive, the temperature plummeting. The lights flickered, and the whispers began, low and menacing. Shadows danced at the edges of their vision, growing darker and more defined. "They're here," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "They're coming." They gathered in a circle, holding hands around the journal, which lay open to the final incantation. Lily began the chant, her voice strong despite the fear that gripped her heart. The room grew colder, and the shadows coalesced into figures, ghostly apparitions of the spirits they had battled before. Mr. Hargrove's form emerged from the darkness, his eyes glowing with malevolent intent. "You cannot escape us," he hissed. "You belong to us now." David tightened his grip on Emma's hand, his voice joining Lily's in the chant. The others followed, their voices rising together in a desperate bid to banish the spirits once and for all. The shadows surged forward, trying to break their circle, but the protective symbols held them at bay. The air crackled with energy, the spirit's anger palpable. The chant reached a fever pitch, the words blending into a powerful force. Mr. Hargrove's form wavered, his eyes narrowing in rage. You think you can defeat us? We are eternal." But the group held firm, their voices unwavering. The energy built to a crescendo, and with a final, unified cry, they completed the incantation. A blinding light filled the room, forcing the shadows back. The spirits screamed, their forms dissolving into the light. The oppressive weight lifted, the air growing warm and still. When the light faded, the spirits were gone. The room was silent, the only sound their ragged breathing. They had won. The final stand was over. David looked around at his friends, their faces etched with relief and exhaustion. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with awe. "It's over." Lily closed the journal, her hands trembling. "We've broken their hold. They won't come back." As they dismantled the protective barriers and cleaned the symbols from the walls, a sense of peace settled over them. The nightmare of the Phantom Hotel was finally behind them, and they could move forward without fear. That night, they slept soundly for the first time in weeks, free from the whispers and shadows that had haunted them. The spirits had been vanquished, their malevolent power broken. The final stand had been fought, and they had emerged victorious. The Phantom Hotel's dark legacy was ended, and the group could finally reclaim their lives, knowing they had faced the darkness and prevailed. With the spirits banished and the final stand behind them, David, Emma, Lily, and Sarah began to rebuild their lives. The oppressive weight that had lingered over them for so long was gone, replaced by a tentative sense of normalcy. But as they tried to move forward, each of them was haunted by the question: had they truly escaped, or was the darkness still lurking, waiting to reclaim them? The days turned into weeks, and the group stayed in close contact, supporting each other as they processed their ordeal. They were determined to ensure that the story of the Phantom Hotel was never forgotten. They decided to publish the caretaker's journal, along with their own accounts, to warn others of the malevolent forces that had nearly consumed them. One evening, as they gathered at David and Emma's house to finalize their plans, a knock on the door startled them. David answered to find a delivery man holding a package. "Are you David Simmons?" the man asked. "Yes," David replied, taking the package. It was addressed to him, but there was no return address. Curious and wary, they opened the package together. Inside was an old, ornate key, similar to the one they had used to enter the Phantom Hotel. Attached to the key was a note, written in a familiar, spidery handwriting. "You can never escape." A chill ran through them. The key seemed to pulse with a dark energy, a tangible reminder of the hotel's lingering influence. The note's message was clear. The spirits were not gone. They had merely been waiting, biding their time. "We have to destroy it," Emma said, her voice trembling. "We can't let the hotel reclaim us." Lily nodded, but her face was pale. "But how? If the spirits are still connected to this key, destroying it might unleash them again." David stared at the key, his mind racing. "We need to find a way to sever the connection once and for all. There has to be something in the journal that can help us." They pored over the journal once more, searching for any clue that might help them break the final link to the spirits. Hours passed, and just when they were about to lose hope, Sarah found a passage they had overlooked. It detailed a final ritual, one that could permanently sever the spirit's hold by casting the key into a consecrated fire. "There's a place not far from here," Lily said, recalling a nearby church known for its ancient consecrated grounds. "We can perform the ritual there." Determined, they made their way to the church that night, the key wrapped tightly in cloth to avoid its touch. The air was cold and still, the moon casting an eerie glow on the old stone building. The church's caretaker, an elderly man with kind eyes, listened to their story with grave understanding. "This place has seen its share of darkness," he said. "You may perform the ritual in the old sanctuary. It's hallowed ground." They followed him to the sanctuary, its ancient walls lined with flickering candles. In the center stood a large iron brazier filled with consecrated wood, ready for the ritual. As they prepared, the air grew colder and the shadows deepened. The spirits were aware of their plan, and they were not pleased. Lily began the chant from the journal, her voice steady and strong. David, Emma, and Sarah joined in, their voices rising in unison. The key seemed to vibrate with malevolent energy, resisting their efforts. The shadows in the sanctuary grew darker, swirling around them, whispering threats and promises of eternal torment. But the group held firm, their voices unwavering. With a final powerful incantation, they cast the key into the consecrated fire. The flames roared to life, engulfing the key in a blinding light. The shadows screamed and writhed, the air filled with a deafening roar. And then, silence. The fire burned brightly, but the malevolent energy was gone. The connection to the spirits had been severed. Exhausted but triumphant, they watched as the flames consumed the key, turning it to ash. The oppressive weight lifted, replaced by a profound sense of peace. They had made their choice, escape over eternity. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. The Phantom Hotel's legacy of terror was finally ended, and they were free. As they left the church, the first light of dawn broke on the horizon, bathing the world in a soft, golden glow. They knew they would carry the scars of their ordeal forever, but they also knew they had triumphed over the darkness. Together, they walked into the new day, ready to reclaim their lives and embrace the future. The past was behind them, and the spirits of the Phantom Hotel would haunt them no more.